September 1967. A hall in Amsterdam. Judges lean over a car that looks decades ahead of everything parked beside it. NSU just claimed European Car of the Year, beating giants many times its size. That's the headline most people remember. Here's what almost nobody knows. Inside this trophy-winning engine, a tiny rubber seal was already wearing out. No judge caught the flaw. Few machines have climbed so high and fallen so fast. The reason lives in how it came together. Tell us where you're watching from, then let's rewind to where it started. Neckarsulm, early 1966. A test engineer named Klaus leans over an engine bay, one hand resting on warm metal. He starts it. No clatter, no shudder through the frame, just a low, steady hum, smoother than anything built with pistons. He'd tested hundreds of engines before this one. None felt like this. Picture the difference. A normal engine slams pistons up and down hundreds of times a second, converting that violent motion into something usable. The Wankel Rotary skipped that violence entirely. Inside its housing, a single triangular rotor spun in a smooth, continuous loop. No pistons, no valves clattering open and shut. Just one elegant piece of metal, tracing the same path again and again. Fewer moving parts meant less to break, or so the engineers believed. Felix Wankel had spent decades chasing this idea, mocked by rivals who thought it belonged in a science magazine, not a driveway. NSU bought his patent when nobody else would touch it. Small and stubborn, the company had built motorcycles for half a century, chasing respect it never quite earned from Germany's bigger automakers. This promised to change that overnight. Executives walked through the Neckarsulm plant that spring, watching prototypes complete lap after lap on the test track outside. Numbers stunned them. Where a comparable piston unit weighed close to 200 kilograms, the Rotary came in under half that, producing similar power from a fraction of the bulk. Under the hood of a mid-size sedan, this meant something almost unheard of. Genuine performance without genuine weight. Board members who'd spent years watching Mercedes and BMW dominate every conversation about German engineering finally had something to boast about. One executive reportedly called it the engine of the next 50 years during a planning meeting in Cologne. Nobody in that room disagreed. So NSU committed everything. Factory floors were reorganized around Rotary production. Suppliers received new specifications for parts nobody had manufactured before. Engineers who'd spent careers refining conventional combustion found themselves learning an entirely different discipline, one built around apex seals and epitrochoidal housings instead of crankshafts and camshafts. Klaus remembers those months as electric. Late nights in the test bay, prototypes running for hours without a single complaint. The quiet thrill of building something nobody else on Earth had managed to perfect. Rivals who dismissed the Rotary as a novelty were about to eat those words in front of European judges. Wrapped around this design sat a body just as forward-thinking. Klaus Luth, NSU's chief designer, penned a shape with a low, wide stance and a glass-heavy cabin that made contemporary sedans look boxy and dated by comparison. Front-wheel drive, disc brakes on all four corners, independent suspension tuned for genuine comfort. Every specification pushed past what buyers expected from a mid-size family car. None of it would matter if the unit underneath couldn't survive daily driving. In that test bay, surrounded by warm metal and the hum of something entirely new, nobody thought to ask how long those seals would actually last under real-world abuse. That question was coming, and it would arrive faster than anyone at Neckarsulm was prepared for. Munich, spring 1968. A service manager at an NSU dealership counts warranty claims stacking up on his desk, more than he's seen in a decade of selling German cars. Something was wrong, and it wasn't rare. It was showing up everywhere. Complaints followed the same pattern. Owners drove their new sedans a few thousand kilometers, then noticed a rough vibration where smoothness used to be. Power dropped. Fuel economy collapsed. Mechanics who'd never touched a Rotary before pulled these units apart and found the apex seals, those small strips of metal sealing each corner of the spinning rotor, worn down to nothing, sometimes in under 15,000 kilometers. 15,000 kilometers. A conventional engine of that era could run past 200,000 before needing major work. This one was failing at a fraction of that distance. and NSU had no fix ready. Dealers scrambled. Replacement units arrived by the truckload, stacked in service bays like spare tires, because that's essentially what they'd become. One mechanic later described entire warehouses dedicated to nothing but rotary replacements, an operation nobody had budgeted for when the car launched. Some estimates suggest NSU replaced more engines than it originally sold in complete cars during those first years. A staggering admission for a company that had bet its future on this exact technology. Money drained fast. Each replacement cost the company dearly, covered entirely under warranty, with no way to pass that expense on to customers who'd already paid full price for a car that kept failing them. Executives who'd celebrated in Cologne 2 years earlier now faced meetings dominated by a single, uncomfortable question. How do you fix a flaw built into the fundamental design? Owners felt something closer to heartbreak than mere frustration. Many had saved for years to afford this car, drawn by its award, its styling, its promise of the future arriving early. Watching that same car stall on the Autobahn, again and again, turned pride into something bitter. A retired schoolteacher from Stuttgart later recalled towing her Ro80 home 3 times in its first 18 months, still convinced she'd made the right choice each time she signed the repair slip. If uncovering stories like this keeps you hooked, hit subscribe. There's another one waiting once this story wraps. Engineers tried everything: new seal materials, revised cooling paths, tighter manufacturing tolerances on each rotor housing. Every fix brought a little more mileage before failure, but none solved the problem outright. The physics fighting against them proved stubborn in ways nobody at Neckarsulm had fully anticipated, back when Klaus first heard that hum smoothly in the test bay. Word spread quickly through German motoring circles, then across Britain and beyond. Magazines that once praised the Ro80's innovation began running follow-up pieces questioning its reliability. Sales, strong at launch, started sliding. Buyers, who'd been ready to order one, suddenly hesitated, waiting to see if NSU could actually solve what its own engineers privately admitted they hadn't fully understood. NSU survived this crisis on paper. Underneath, the damage went far deeper than any balance sheet could show. A company that staked its entire identity on being years ahead of everyone else now found itself explaining, dealership by dealership, why its flagship couldn't make it a year without breaking down. That damage left the company exposed at exactly the wrong moment. A much larger rival was already circling, watching NSU bleed money it couldn't spare, waiting for the right time to make a move nobody at Neckarsulm saw coming. Stuttgart, 1969. Executives from Volkswagen sit across the table from NSU's leadership, reviewing numbers that told a grim story. Warranty costs had drained reserves faster than any sales figure could offset. NSU needed a lifeline, and Volkswagen, watching a smaller rival stumble, saw an opening worth taking. Negotiations moved fast that year. By 1969, NSU merged into a new entity alongside Auto Union, forming what would eventually become Audi. Paperwork changed hands quietly, without the fanfare that once surrounded the Ro80's award ceremony 2 years earlier. Klaus, still working in the test bay he remembers so vividly, later described the mood as somewhere between relief and mourning. Relief that the company survived, mourning for what independence had meant. Here's what most retrospectives skip entirely. The merger wasn't really the ending. It was a pause button on a much longer story still playing out inside engineering departments. Nobody outside the industry ever noticed. Seal technology kept evolving, even as the Ro80 itself faded from showrooms. Engineers who'd spent years fighting apex sealware on the Rotary passed their findings into broader combustion research across the newly merged company. Improved metallurgy, better heat treatment processes, refined tolerances on rotating components, lessons paid for in warranty claims, eventually strengthened engine programs that had nothing to do with rotaries at all. Consider what that actually means. A flaw that nearly destroyed NSU became, years later, a case study engineers still reference when designing any high-tolerance rotating part. Mazda, pursuing its own rotary ambitions through the 1970s, studied NSU's failures closely, determined not to repeat the same mistake with its own apex seals. Where NSU had rushed a groundbreaking idea into mass production, Mazda took the harder, slower path toward genuine reliability. That contrast tells you everything about timing and engineering. Being first rarely means being ready. NSU proved a radical concept could work beautifully on a test bench and in a boardroom presentation, then discovered the brutal gap between prototype perfection and a decade of ordinary customers driving through rain, cold, and stop-and-go traffic without ever thinking about seal wear. Picture an engineer today, decades removed from Neckarsulm, running a sealing simulation on a screen NSU's team couldn't have imagined. Somewhere in that software sits an assumption, a safety margin, a tolerance specification traced back through decades of institutional memory to one company that learned the hardest way possible what happens when ambition outruns patience. NSU's badge stopped appearing on new cars within a few short years. That part of the story is genuinely sad, and it deserves acknowledgement rather than a footnote. But treating the merger as the whole story misses something far more interesting happening underneath it, an idea too advanced for 1967, quietly maturing inside engineering departments for decades afterward, waiting for materials science to finally catch up with what NSU's engineers had imagined all along. Somewhere today, an Ro80 still starts on a cold morning, its seals rebuilt with materials NSU's engineers never had. The flaw that broke a company eventually got solved, just too late to save it. Want to know which car actually cracked the seal problem for good? Subscribe and find out next.